Hello, this is Real World Audio, and I hope you have all seen my videos on the dynamic resolution and the rail voltage, supply voltage of the amplifiers. And there I have made a few videos which state that the higher your rail or supply voltage, the greater the dynamic resolution is available for you, and you will hear much more low level details, and that's really part of the laws of physics. That's how things work, and you can circle back to these videos, but now I will show you a concrete example so that you can see it better how these things come to be. So volts in real life. So now let's just choose a loudspeaker, and the loudspeaker will be 101 dB sensitive. And then we will choose two amplifiers that go with the loudspeaker. And one of the amplifiers will be the Darling amplifier, which I am sharing with you how to build it at home. It is a little single-ended triode tube amplifier, and I named such a high sensitivity loudspeaker because that's something, if you use that with your Darling amp, then you will have a pretty wide range sound with it, in the sense that you will have a really wide dynamic range with it. And the Darling amplifier is a little less than 1 watt per channel output, and you would think that if you get a 200 watt amplifier, then the 200 watt amplifier will be 200 times better with that efficient loudspeaker. And now of course you are right, because if you look at it, that with this sensitivity, what is the peak sound pressure level that your amplifier will be capable of? The Darling amp will be capable of 100 dB per meter sound pressure level, and your 200 watt amp will be capable of 124 dB per meter sound pressure level. So clearly the 200 watts will give you tremendous volume, like a live concert level volume. The Darling amp, it will still give you pretty darn loud 100 dB volume. That's enough for your neighbors to call the cops. And if you need more, honestly, then that's when you need the 200 watt amp. Otherwise, there's not much need for that. Only if you listen to extremely loud music. But if you listen at these levels, then I really have to caution that your hearing is going to deteriorate quite fast if it hasn't already. Also, the difference between the Darling amp and your typical 200 watt solid state amplifier is that the voltage that creates that 100 dB volume is 250 volts in the Darling amp and 60 volts in the solid state amp. So this is when we play at the peak volume. Of course, in both cases, they will be a little bit lower, because the voltage is never going to be like the whole range of the rail. So it's not 0 watt and 60 watt. It will be a diminished range between the two of them. Same thing goes for the Darling amp. It won't be 250 watts. I would say maybe only about 160, 180, and here maybe like 40 watts, something like that. Because if it would be the entire thing, it would be like shorting out your capacitor bank temporarily. And that's that doesn't really happen, or if it happens, it means there's already tremendous distortion occurring at that. However, I just mentioned that it's not these numbers, but these numbers are respective. So they are a great comparison for us. We got the order of magnitude and we can use them to calculate. Because as you drop the sound pressure level, as you drop the dBs, the drop in the voltage is commensurate with the dB drop. I'm not going to go into how the dB scale works, but basically with the Darling amplifier with the same loudspeaker, if you want to listen to a medium volume, 60 dB level, then you have 2.5 volts available for you to create a medium volume music. Same thing with the 200 watt amp, you have 0.04 volts, 40 millivolts available to reproduce the dynamic level at medium listening level. So that's 62 times less voltage. So let me say again, over 60 times lower voltage available for your 200 watt solid state amp compared to the less than 1 watt little tube amplifier. So this means that you have 60 times more voltage available for you for the dynamic contrast with the tiny amp, and that's huge, guys. That's an insane amount. And this is why when you have a low power amplifier, that's why they are insanely good and insanely so much better at normal listening levels for normal people if you just listen to at volumes where most people listen, because here you have still tremendous resolution compared to the almost negligible resolution for a high power amplifier. So now if we drop to a whisper level, which is 20 dB, that you can barely hear. If your background noise is high, you won't hear that level at all. If your background noise, you live in a very quiet neighborhood and you do late night listening, then you easily hear into the 20 dB level, and that's 25 millivolts available for your Darling amp at that whisper level, and for your solid state amp 0.4 millivolts available. And now I have a pretty bad news for everyone. Oh, let's just go back. Is that we hit here the noise floor. So for most solid state amps, 1 millivolt rail, that's the level of the noise floor of the amp. So if we're going lower than that, instead of the whisper level, you are only going to hear noise. So you won't be able to use your high power solid state amp with whisper level listening with high efficiency loudspeaker. So now let's drop the efficiency a little bit. If we drop to a 95 dB loudspeaker, which would be typically the high efficiency loudspeakers in the market that you can buy in the stores. The previous example, the 100 dB, is something the ultra high efficiency. It's very rare, but this thing is not so rare. You can buy such loudspeakers easily. So in that case, for to create a whisper level, we need 50 millivolts. So it means that we have to push it louder. And with your solid state amp, you need 0.8 millivolts for that level. So we are getting much closer to the noise floor, but we are still below the noise floor of the amp. So it's going to erase the whisper level details from the sound because the noise floor is eating it up. And of course, with lowering the efficiency of loudspeaker, now we can only attain 118 dB with the high power amp and 94 dB with the Darling amp. And going for 89 dB efficiency, which would be most typical loudspeakers today, then with the Darling amp we can go 88 dB peak volume, 112 dB with the 200 watt, and the whisper level is now requires 1.6 millivolts to drive. And this is why everyone, I would say most of us are experiencing that if you have a high power amplifier, you can still listen to it at low level, because even the whisper level is above the noise floor of the amplifier. But if you are going to hook up something which is high efficiency speaker, that's why the quiet parts start to suck, because your amplifier is running out of low level capacity. And if you go for ultra level efficiency, then you have a problem not at whisper level, but already at creeping into the medium volume. You have the internal noise floor of the amplifier erasing all the dynamic information. And it's pretty hard to notice for those who are not experienced with hearing these aspects, are not consciously listening to it, because at the medium and loud levels, your solid state amp is going to play with a lot of textural detail. So the texture is there. And when audiophiles listen to music, almost everyone listens only for the textural detail level. But the dynamic detail level, that will be gone. But most people are not even aware of it, because most of us do not have a comparison basis to compare against, because the solid state amps are the norm today, and people are not even exposed to vacuum tube amplifiers, so most people don't even have a clue of what low-level dynamic range is. So what's next? Going for an 83 dB loudspeaker, which would be a really insensitive loudspeaker. Now we see that the 200 watt is getting into its element, because it requires 3 millivolts for a whisper level to reproduce. Excuse me. And that's already quite a bit above the noise floor of the amplifier. So that's why a high power amp really loves low efficiency, low sensitivity loudspeakers, because they work together. With that very low efficiency loudspeaker, the whisper level from a Darling amp requires 200 millivolts voltage, but it also means that instead of the puny 3 millivolts, we have 200 millivolts that creates detail level, dynamic detail level. So technically, the Darling amp has a tremendous advantage with that, even at 83 dB in the low-level dynamics. However, why we do not see this getting translated for the most is because the most 83 dB loudspeakers require a lot of additional control from the amplifier. And I'm not saying control in a way that the Darling amp doesn't have control and the solid state does have control, but in a way that the Darling amp is built to control a loudspeaker that is of high efficiency, and the cone has a natural air interface, and then uses the room acoustics and the air to provide the background, the basis for the control. And for the solid state amplifiers, they work much better with loudspeakers where the cone itself is really restricted, very restrained, and it requires the amplifier to correct the errors in the cone, which it makes because there is no good cone air interface. So what we call as amplifier control nowadays and high damping factor, all of these are requirements, because the loudspeakers with which these equipment are designed to work with, they have bad cone air interface. So it's kind of like if you use a dancing analogy, you have no connection with your dance partner, you don't know how to lead, then you need to put your dance partner in chains and drag her around the dance floor. That's what the analogy for a high damping factor loudspeaker amplifier is. So basically, you have to force feed your loudspeaker cone because the loudspeaker cone is not interfacing with the air properly, so it will make lots of errors. That's why you need to correct the errors. And in the case of a non-feedback low power amplifier, we are using loudspeakers which interface well with the air, and that's why you do not need to create those errors because there are no errors introduced there. Actually, there are, but the scale of those errors is orders of magnitude lower than what is happening here. But because if you made such loudspeaker that requires that correction, so the Endarling amplifier, even though it has tremendously higher dynamic detail capacity, but because there is no error correction mechanism introduced, and that's why we are going to lose a lot of those benefits, especially at the extremes of the frequency ranges, like low frequencies and high frequencies, but some of it will stick in the mid-range, so where the cone can interface well with the air, around 1 kilohertz, that's where your Darling amp will most likely quite a bit outperform a 200 watt solid state amp, even with high damping factor. So going back to our initial case of a very efficient loudspeaker, then let's have a look at the rail hum, at the noise floor of the amplifier. And let's make it into the next video, because the noise floor of the amplifier defines how low can you hear into the sound, what is the lowest sound or dynamics and textural definition that you can get from the amp. Thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and we'll continue. Bye bye.